summit so far and getting lots of useful information. I know that I have. We have had a terrific morning and an early afternoon. So along with the wonderful speakers that we have 2 more speakers that are coming up in our next session, Pathway to Transition. So I introduce to you Vijay Patel. His pronouns are he, him, is a senior director in EY Parthenon Strategy and Transaction Practice, focused on health, science, and wellness. He is a gay cis male serving in an advisory capacity for Unity Professional Network, EY's LGBTQ plus employee resource group, and sits on EY Dallas Diversity and Inclusion Council. He is passionate about developing his team members professionally and advocating for work culture that allows each individual to be their authentic self every day. He brings a unique perspective through diversity, intersectionality, including Indian heritage, African-born parents, born and raised in Texas, and identifying as gay. We also have Kara Dlouhy. Pronouns are any and all, is a non-binary, trans-feminine senior red teamer and penetration tester for EY based in Houston. They are 26 years old and have worked professionally as a penetration tester for 5 years. They came out as a trans woman on September 3rd, 2017, and have been transitioning for the past 3 years. Outside of work, they are an activist for the transgender community and write screenplays featuring queer characters to increase positive representation of trans people in film. And I'm excited to hear what Kara and Vijay have to say.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for the warm introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend this very timely topic. We're truly excited to be sharing EY's focus and program around Pathway to Transition, and look forward to having a robust conversation. If you do have any questions, please do utilize the Q&A feature. We'd love to reserve some of the end of the call or end of the session today to walk through some of those questions. So as any typical audit firm would have us do, we do have to put a disclaimer that the views expressed today during this presentation and of Kira and myself are not necessarily of Ernst & Young or any of our global member firms. And these slides are truly for educational purposes only and not intended to be relied upon for accounting, tax, and professional advice. So if you need any of those advice, please reach out to your specific advisors. All right, so we wanted to walk through our agenda today and kind of give an overview of our objectives. So first of all, we'd like to ground everybody through terminology within the trans and gender diverse community. And then we have a spotlight with Kira providing insights from the trans perspective. Then talk about how we can enable allyship as a team member and leader and a colleague. And then finally, how EY is broadly supporting trans team members. So our objective today is the audience will be oriented to various initiatives and activities needed to support an individual's transition from the lens of a trans employee, employer, team members, and talent teams. All right, so before we begin, we actually wanted to do a couple of polling questions. So let me get those on the screen. And we're going to be utilizing Menti for those of you who may be familiar. And you can use this through your phone. We'll give folks about a minute or so, but go to www.menti.com. And then you'll be prompted to put in a code. And the code is 40400569. And the question is, how many Americans identify as transgender? We'll wait about 45 seconds to a minute. Definitely tough choices. But the correct answer is 1.4 million, which is quite healthy. And, you know, to be completely frank, those numbers are probably underestimated, you know, because a lot of these surveys and, you know, information is really self-reported. And so, you know, many folks may not feel as comfortable to report out on it. So I anticipate, or I have a hunch that it's much larger than that. All right, we've got one more question for y'all. What does the I represent in LGBTQIA+? Well, it looks like with the vibrations of intersex, most folks are putting that word in, and that's correct. And we will be reviewing some of those key terminologies and definitions. So appreciate, and it sounds like we've got 100% a grade there. All right. So toggling back to our presentation for today. There we go. Should be coming up here soon. There we go. All right. So we wanted to provide an understanding of the meanings behind some of these terms that are used within popular culture. So I'm going to walk through some of these because, you know, as an educational experience for myself, sometimes it's difficult for folks or may not be aware of how to use these common terms. So gender expression is the way in which someone expresses their gender. They may include gender expressions through their clothes, makeup, hairstyle. It's mostly about how they present themselves outwardly. Gender identity is a person's own understanding of their own gender, which may or may not correspond to the gender traditionally prescribed to their sex identified assigned at birth. One of the other terms is transitioning or transition, which we'll be talking a lot more later on in this presentation, is a fluid process of adopting the outward and or physical characteristics of gender one identifies with, as opposed to the gender commonly associated with one's sex assigned at birth. The process is different for each individual, and not all trans people make changes to their physical appearance. This may include changes in name and pronoun, telling others about one's identity, hormone therapy, gender-affirming medical procedures, change in style of dress, etc. Many folks are familiar with the acronym LGBTQ, and we just did a polling question. This is a common and evolving acronym that it refers to lesbian, bisexual, gay, trans, queer, intersex, asexual, and other identities denoted non-heterosexuality and freedom of gender expression. All right, we've got a few more terms to go through. So non-binary, a term used by a person whose identity does not fit into a binary of female male or women man. Other non-binary identity terms are gender queer, gender fluid, agender. And we did a polling question around intersex, which is defined as people who are intersex are born with physical, hormonal, or genetic features that are neither wholly female or male, or are a combination of both. Intersex characteristics originate from genetic, chromosomal, and hormonal variations. So trans and transgender, this is our topic for today, a term that is used by individuals whose gender identity differs from the one most commonly used in conjunction with the sex they are assigned at birth. Cisgender, someone like myself, describes a person who is not transgender, a term used to refer to an individual whose gender identity corresponds with the one commonly associated with the sex they're assigned at birth. And then finally, sex assigned at birth is the assignment and classification of people as male, female, intersex, or other sex designations based on physical anatomy at birth and or biological testing of chromosomal makeup. So I know we walked through these pretty quickly, but we wanted to share, there seems to sometimes be a little bit of cross, but these are very distinct definitions and commonly used terms. All right, so we are going to be moving into our second topic, is insights from a trans perspective, which we have Kira. So Kira, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could reintroduce yourself, and then we'd love to hear some insights from yourself.
Definitely. Hello, everybody. I am Dlouhy. I use any and all pronouns, and I've been out as transgender for the past almost 5 years now. And I have been transitioning at work since 2019. So I've gotten a lot of experience working with companies and like diversity, equity, and inclusion panels, getting policies related to transgender people updated, standardized, and things like that. I've worked with EY since December of 2020 and based in Houston, Texas. And I've been, I've been fully out at EY. So I haven't gone through the transition process itself that like I did at my previous job. So everything that I'm doing is the pretty much working with what's here, getting everything shored up, and helping out trans people that I've come to that have came out to me because of being visible at EY. Um, to talk about some of the insights into, especially my generation, Generation Z. Um, hmm, I know a lot of people about my age, 26 and younger, have been wildly accepting of trans people. And I know that whenever I speak with my little sister or like some of my friends, younger kids, they say that at schools, a lot of people, a lot of the students will help with trans people, support trans people, and like advocate for them, which is something that I've really come to appreciate. Especially with like looking at um the slides where you have that over a third of Gen Z are gender nonconforming, which is I think awesome, and 35% knowing somebody using gender neutral pronouns like they them. So I mean that's me. I'm obviously I use any of them, but it's been something that has been a market change in society in the US. And I think that as more acceptance of people, especially from Gen Z, becomes the norm, we're going to see the number of people that are gender nonconforming going up quite a bit. And as they realize that they can more or less express who they are openly and proudly and can be honest with themselves and with other people about what their gender identity is or isn't in some cases. And I think that's great. Another 32% of Gen Z is identifying as not heterosexual, which I think that these numbers would probably could be applied to older generations as well, but obviously because of societal pressures and whatnot, those numbers will almost certainly be massively underreported, you know? So we've had a lot of I'm very hopeful for the future, like seeing all of Gen Z being proudly queer, proudly open about their support and love and understanding of trans people like me. I think that we have a lot to look forward to in the future. All right. So moving on from the statistics, some of the elements of transition. Obviously, I'm going to give a disclaimer that medical transition, social transition, things like that are different for every trans person out there. They're different for, like, no two trans people are like, no two transitions are the same, and it's different for everybody. Typically, what I did when I came out was I went I messaged some people that I was friends with, and I asked them to start using Kira as my name instead of my previous name, my well, what we call dead name, which is the name you were legally assigned at birth and don't use anymore. So when I did that, they started calling me Kira, and I asked them to use at the time she/her pronouns for me, and that was honestly the start of my social transition. Um, they used that, and I realized more and more that this was the path that I wanted to be on. And as that happened, I started looking and I started coming out to more and more people. And then I decided that once I had come out to the vast majority of people in my life, and including like friends and family, I was going to start medical transition. And medical transition, of course, is different for everybody. A lot of questions. When I first came out to my dad, the very first thing he asked me was, "Am I going to have the surgery?" The surgery, of course, meaning that, am I going to have what a lot of people know as SRS, sexual reassignment surgery? There's tons of different terms for that now, but don't do this. Please, if somebody comes out to you, please don't ask if they're gonna have the surgery. I really don't want people to think about my genitalia. I just want to kind of keep that private, because it's nobody's business but mine, honestly. And it's like, you ask two trans people, you could have somebody who is completely fine with getting all the gender affirming surgeries they want. If you're a trans feminine or a trans woman like me, you could get bottom surgery, the SRS. You can get a breast augmentation, facial feminization surgery, um, or you can get none of those, and it doesn't make you any more or less trans than anybody else. And if you're trans masculine, trans man, you can get top surgery, which is a mastectomy to remove the breast tissue. You could get phalloplasty, things like that. Um, there really aren't. A lot of people are really weirdly invasive about it, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable to talk about it sometimes. But I think that demystifying the transition process for people is probably the best thing we can do, because questions are awkward. Questions are absolutely awkward, and I hate that a lot of the times I'm seen as this person that is not really a person, but more of an object of fascination or curiosity. So like, people will gawk at me, people will look at me weird, people ask me very uncomfortable questions, and I think that I would really like that to not happen. So that was kind of a bit of a divergence, but the elements of transition that I've come to realize are most important to me, at least, is definitely getting acceptance from your support system, from like your friends and your family. um there is a very sobering high number. Oh, sorry, I'm getting some echo. My bad. So I'm gonna say some kind of upsetting to me, which is that a lot of trans people have been we've struggled a lot with suicidal thoughts and ideation. And studies have consistently shown that people who transition and have support systems, where it's like supportive friends, supportive family, supportive societal structures, their risk of suicide and ideation and thoughts goes down significantly to about the population, or the numbers that the cisgender population experiences. So I think that's why I think that social transition arguably is one of the most important things to like come out and do, because once you get that social transition going and getting the um support that you need, you'll become a lot more happier with yourself. And medical transition, one thing that a lot of people do, but once again, not all trans people do, is hormone replacement therapy, wherein you take, in my case, estrogen, to have like feminizing hormones, or if you're a trans man, you would have testosterone. And one thing that really helps with that a lot of people don't understand, is it completely rewires your brain chemistry and causes you to, well, at least in my case, have amazing mental clarity and amazing like change in mood. The first time I was ever happy in my life is when I started estrogen, because I happened to get, you know, I happened to get happy thoughts and whatnot. Uh, but I digress. when I came out at work back in 2019, there wasn't really any defined policy for trans people because at the time at the job I was at, there were no trans people out in the workplace. Despite having several thousand employees, I was the first to come out and start transitioning, so I had to help build out um, that policy with them. I worked with my company's HR team. I worked with resources like the Human Rights Council to get them to implement the policies for transitioning at the workplace. Some of the roles that I've had help with are working with the diversity, equity, and inclusion team. I've worked with HR. I've worked with my coworkers. For instance, did presentations with them to understand, this is who I am, this is how I'd like to be called, how I'd like to be referred to, things like that. And I had HR with me as well when I came out so that people could actually understand and realize that I have, support and kind of like a please don't be transphobic to this person. I think the biggest consideration that I had when I tried to transition at work was this is something that a lot of people get icky about, but it was like bathroom policies, dress policies, things like that. I didn't know if that was going to be a deal breaker for my company because people are very weird about trans people using the bathroom, and I wanted to make sure that that was okay for me to do, and I worked with my company to get that included, and I'm very glad that they did say that. Oh yes, you can use the women's restroom. If anybody has any problem with it, tell them or go to HR, and that really helped. Another thing was dress code. I didn't know how I was going to be received, like having a feminine presentation, but having that policy be written that I was allowed to present my gender the way I wanted to, and that my company wouldn't tolerate any what's the term I'm looking for, that they wouldn't tolerate my clients being weird about it, was something that I found to be extremely helpful and gave me a lot of reassurance that I was able to transition at work. I was able to be supported. And coming to EY, I saw that these policies were already in place, and I've had a very good time here, knowing that I have the support of EY. It's been good, transitioning for the last few years at work. I think it's been a very good benefit, and I've had a lot of very positive things to say about being able to be myself at work, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Kira, really appreciate you sharing your story. I think it was very powerful to just hear, unplugged your experience and, sharing, what you've experienced. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So I want to revert back a little bit and just wanted to know, how did you realize you were trans?
Ooh. So when I was a kid, I think about 5 years old, one of the earliest memories of my life is when I would go to bed every night from the ages of 5 to 8. I would pray to God to wake up as a girl the next day, and after a few years of that happening, I kind of repressed those thoughts, and I had always had questions about my gender, like wondering why it felt so different from like cis men, why I felt like I wasn't a part of them. And it wasn't until 2012 that I actually knew of somebody who was trans. So I was 16 at the time, and I didn't know that was a thing that I could be. I didn't know that I could be trans, and I kind of repressed those thoughts too because I was scared to know what that meant. But in 2016, I heard that one of my old friends from high school had come out as a trans woman, and so I started messaging her about gender. We talked every day, hours at a time, for months and months about how I can present my gender, what I really think about how I want to be perceived in society, how I perceive myself, things like that. And it was actually September 3rd, 2017, I believe was the date that I realized that I was indeed transgender, and I came out to her, and she was extremely supportive. and that's pretty much how I realized I was trans, by reading a lot, understanding a lot of people's experiences, understanding my life in the context of being trans, whether it's like the gender dysphoria I experienced or the gender euphoria I did end up experiencing when people were called me Kira and referred to me like at the time with she her pronouns. I think that was when I realized that I am trans, and being trans is the exact I am trans, and transitioning is the exact thing that I need to do to live my life as at the absolute most I could, to the absolute fullest, I should say.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So what are some of what are a couple of things that you wish people understood about your experience?
hmm I think that for a lot of people, even when I'm out, even when I'm out in society or with my friends, I'm considered the trans friend. Like people, they accept me, they understand me as a woman, but I'm like one of the only trans people they know. So sometimes people will listen to my experience, and of course I'm happy to share it, but my experience is the only one they know of or they listen to. So I wish people would understand that there are so many different trans experiences and that mine isn't the only one. I think that what would have helped me the most, honestly, is having people listen to me when I say that listening to other trans experiences is just as important as listening to mine. Um, to g- this is the kind of a iffy statement because some people take it weirdly that I've noticed, but with my experience, I think the one thing I would want most is don't listen to me as this super authoritative subject on trans experiences. Instead, listen to trans people of colors, especially Black trans people, because one thing I've come to realize as I've transitioned is that my experiences as a white trans woman is different from pretty much every other part of the community. And one thing I've noticed is that when people just listen to me, they don't really advocate for trans people of color. And the thing with that is why I want it so bad is every problem, every issue, every struggle that I face as like a white trans person is faced by trans people of color, and but to a much more significant degree, and including obviously the intersections of racism, trans misogyny, things like that. Um, if trans people of color advocated for, my life will improve because everything that I face will be improved, and everything that they face will be improved as well. And I absolutely love my siblings of color, and I want them to be listened to. I want them to be uplifted. I want them to be celebrated and cherished and fought for and advocated for. And I think that, to answer your question of like what I want people to know about my experience, is I want people of color to be listened to, and I want people of color to be celebrated because that will benefit society as a whole.
I definitely want to expand on the advocacy, but we'll table that for a little bit later in the discussion. But you did segue me to my next question is, uh, talking about, being a white trans individual versus the experience of a color trans. How do you think access and opportunity for you, or maybe not, have played a role in your personal and professional success?
Mhm. Mm. Whew. So to be completely honest, I know that despite all the struggles that have come with being trans, like in the workplace, I had a lot of acceptance and a lot of understanding, being white, because there's just a lot of people, even if they're not trans, that like me racially in the workplace. I've had a lot of people just be accepting of me in society more so than they would of like Black trans individuals, and that leads to me being able to get amazing jobs like with EY that fully supports me, because I get to have the white privilege of being more accepted in society, being less stigmatized, even though I'm still very much stigmatized, having people that will advocate for me, that will love me, that'll understand me better, when a lot of my siblings girl don't get that. What I've noticed in the workplace is that of all the trans people I've met, I think there's been at work, there hasn't been many of them. There's been like maybe a dozen um, trans people that I've met, but the only trans person of color I've only met one. And I think that that's very indicative of how, even though we have a workplace that's very inclusive of trans people, there's still societal pet systems, structural issues that keep people of color down. And if I fully believe that if I was born a black trans individual, I would not have this job right now because I wouldn't have most of society's support to be myself and have myself be celebrated and cared about and listened to for as much of as little as it is, honestly. So that's why I'm pretty much always advocating for more inclusion in every facet of society, is because I want people of color to be uplifted and celebrated, and I want them to be in the workplace and working with me because I'm I am so tired of losing my trans siblings of color. I have seen so many people. I've lost a lot of people, and especially siblings of color that I was friends with online, and then I wake up and see that they're gone. Um, it gets hard. It gets really hard knowing that like I don't get to see siblings of color be happy and like advocated for to the degree that I am. I want to see more siblings of color in the workplace, and I want them to be celebrated in society. And it gets really hard, especially around Trans Day of Remembrance, when we read out all the names of the trans people that were killed in the past year, and over 90% of them are trans people of color, people that were human beings that just wanted to live a happy, celebrated, and cherished life, and they don't get to.
Yeah, that's definitely hard to swallow. Um, so I guess one of my last questions regarding all of this is, folks like myself that, truly want to advocate and, assist the trans community and being able to feel included and respected. What can we do? What can we do on an everyday basis, whether it's small or large, so we can support you in the way that we can feel comfortable in supporting you?
Definitely. I think if I had to give somebody some advice, to give allies advice on how to best support trans people, I would absolutely say listen to us. Try to understand all of the different perspectives and that come with being trans. Like listen to people like me to understand the basics of being trans. Listen to trans people of color to truly understand the depths of things. Advocate for us because there's just not a lot of us. There really isn't. And when things happen in society, like the over 200 anti-transgender bills that have been proposed this year in state legislatures across the country, we a lot of people don't really advocate for us because they don't really know trans people. They don't really know what they can do. I think the best thing to do is to share our stories. Like share our stories with people. Get them to understand us. Not as this weird community, not as this object to be curious about, but as human beings. We have dreams, we have aspirations, we have hopes, struggles, and pain. And the best thing that I think allies can do is to listen to us, to advocate for us, to write their legislators and say, please stop, and tell them that they can't support somebody who is taking away our rights. They're like stripping us of not being able to, or stripping us of being able to like change our gender markers, change our names, play in sports, use the restroom, medically transition. I just want people to fight for us because, especially now, with how bad the anti-trans bills are, not a lot of people do. A lot of my allies, I share things with them and they just don't do much. They tell me that, oh, that's really sad. That's really unfortunate that that's happening to you. And then they don't do anything. And I've been fighting these anti-trans bills as much as I can for the past 3 years while they've been proposed. And it just feels like it keeps getting worse. And I think that here in Texas, we had uh the AG Ken Paxton and Governor Greg Abbott make a directive saying that anybody who is trans under, I think, the age of 18 and is supported by their parents, they're going to get investigated for being child abusers, and they're going to have their children taken away, and the parents are going to be arrested. So not. When I tried like sharing all these stories, people just didn't listen. And the best thing that allies can do is just please fight for us. We really need it.
Appreciate the heat there. Walking into our next topic, Kira, is really around the allyship as a team member and leader. And so wanted to walk through, best leading practices that allies and advocates can do to support team members. So wanted to walk through some of the basic responsibilities for everybody. Let's see here. So we've got, take responsibility to educate yourself, which you have definitely reinforced during your conversation. Do preliminary research. Don't just look to one individual to really be your educator, as you've expressed. I think it's powerful to hear, right? There are so many different stories out there, so many different experiences, and the evolution to transition is very different for everyone. And so just being exposed. And I know as I do a lot more of the ERG work within EY, constantly honing in on the exposure aspect, having more, unplugged conversations such as this to really understand the perspectives of those that the topic is residing for. So you had mentioned earlier, right? Respect people's privacy. If someone discloses to you that they are trans, ask them if they're sharing in confidence with you. Just making sure that us as team members that we can respect each other's privacy. Especially like you talked about, let's not ask invasive questions about medical history or, individual's body. I mean, that's just not appropriate for work. And, as you had mentioned, that's your business, not ours. Challenge your own conceptions about gender appropriate roles and behaviors. I know that this is one that I have definitely made a conservative effort. And, we'll talk about language on the next slide. But for me, it really reined in, just being super open to everyone, because you never know the experiences that they've had, the socioeconomic dynamics that they were brought up in. And so really, walking into every interaction, just not having a specific expectation, especially around gender roles. And then, this is one that actually was a little surprising for me, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this, was avoid backhanded compliments or tips like, oh, I couldn't tell you were trans, or you're so brave. You'd mentioned that you don't want to be known as, or, only perceived as the trans friend. And so, how we want to celebrate your individuality. We want to celebrate your, your distinct personality and your authenticity. So how do we bridge the gap, or make sure that we don't cross the line to making sure that our friends and colleagues feel welcome, that we feel inquisitive, but we're not crossing the line? I think that's, at least personally for me, that's where I tend to retreat and just not try to ask questions.
Yeah, so I know on that, Like, I'm looking at the comment, I couldn't tell you were trans. I've had that a couple times. Like, specifically with that comment, the way it's loaded is people have this conception of what a trans person looks like in their head, and it's pretty much just like man in dress, maybe like a drag queen, and it's like I love drag queens, but some of them aren't trans. And when you say I couldn't tell you're trans, what that tells me is that you couldn't clock me. Clocking in this case means realizing I was trans, and that conception that you have in your head of, oh, this is what a trans person has to look like. Um, I don't want people to have this, because trans people can look like literally anyone and anything.
Yeah.
And I just wish more people would not perceive trans people as this monolith of this person is trans because they do X or they look like Y, things like that. You're so brave. That statement in itself seems innocuous, but my problem with this as a compliment is I have so many people tell me that, especially when I first came out. But and then I was like, yeah, I mean, I am brave, thank you. And then I realized, a few months in that I shouldn't have to be brave. I shouldn't have to be brave to be myself. I just want to be accepted for who I am and then not have to worry about people like calling me brave because there won't be a reason to be brave. I want people to like advocate to have society treat me better. I could always tell you're trans. Ooh, I know specifically with that. You can't always tell. You can't always tell when somebody is trans, and you could get the wrong ideas about somebody, and then think turns out they're actually cis. So if you want to like assume that about a cis person, please don't just like assume somebody is trans because we're all different. I reinforce that point a lot that we are all so different that we can't really. I mean, we just can't have one experience described to us. Um, Other backhanded compliments I've gotten are things like, "Oh, I'm trying to remember some of them, but yeah, just if you want to compliment us, do it in a way where it's like, don't be overly supportive, where you make such a big deal about us being trans. I know that for the vast majority of my friends and me, I don't want people to just be like, "Oh my god, you're so beautiful, you're so stunning, you're so brave," things like that. I just want people to say, if I come out to them as trans, to say, "That's really cool," and and to
And I
say like,
support you.
"Thank you for telling me." Yeah, and to just have support, knowing that like, yeah, I have you on my side. I think that would be the best.
Yeah.
Don't just like overly praise me because that just makes it really weird.
I hear you. I hear you.
Mm,
Some of this can definitely be transferred over to the LGB folks as well. So
mhm,
this resonates as well. So we've got a few more items to go through around basic responsibilities. So ask respectfully if you're uncertain about someone's name or pronoun. I think it's totally fine to ask. If someone has indicated their name or pronouns, make a concerted effort to use those because they were intentional.
mhm,
One example that I would use even just for myself, right? Like some people will message me and put V and J. And although, I know they don't mean it maliciously, it's a little lazy. And when I think
mhm,
about my name, I think my name is Vijay. And then, in terms of pronouns, I'm very deliberate. And then, I've definitely made mistakes in the past and called folks by their, non-preferred pronouns. And as soon as they either correct me or I recognize it, I apologize, don't linger on it, and then I just make
mhm,
a better effort. And so I hope that that's the right approach. Um, one thing, you and I started working on this stuff maybe about 3-4 weeks ago, and you and I have not worked together before.
mhm,
And you had mentioned that your preferred pronouns are all,
mhm,
and I struggled with, do I ask Kira? Like, okay, I know Kira is okay with anything, but like, what's the preference, right? And then I, mulled on it a little bit longer, and I was like, no, Kira has indicated what Kira wants to be known as, and essentially it's my pick. So, and I appreciated that, and you have already made the effort to let the world know like how you would like to be addressed. It's now time for us to adopt and adapt, and I think that's definitely a learning lesson for all. And so other ways to just go about this, right? And I think this is really powerful. It's okay to ask, which pronouns do you use? Or how would you like to be referred in terms of gender? And can you remind me of your name? And I actually use that one just generally, right? Like it's sometimes I forget people's names. And then, I actually, using the word guys has become very, very aware, I'm very aware and astute to it now. There was a cisgendered woman who had called out once that the use of the word guys is literally in writing alienating a segment of the audience, right? And so for us to group a collective group of human beings as guys is not inclusive. And so I like to use the colloquial words of folks and y'all if you're from the South, but you can use words like all and everyone, people, or team. It's definitely something like on my personal teams where I'm trying to reinforce it. It's definitely going to take some practice, and I know at sometimes I probably break that rule, but if there's personally, if there's one phrase that I would implore on our audience is try to take out the word in referencing a group of people as guys. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to expand on this slide, or if there's anything else that we should be aware of, Kira, in terms of like just everyone's basic responsibilities.
Yeah. One thing that I think I see a lot of people do it is especially like early in transition when I only used she her pronouns. If some people, whenever they would refer to me, they would call me they would use like he him pronouns for me, they would get really upset about it and just be overly apologetic, which makes things very awkward. Honestly, it's like I feel like I'm then pressured to like comfort them, say no, you made a mistake, it's okay. But like a lot of people just make a really big deal when honestly most trans people that I know just they don't really want it to be a big deal. They just want it to be like, oh, you called me he, then say use she or pronouns, and then the other person to be like, oh, thank you for telling me. Then we move on. Um, I know that asking for pronouns, asking for names, that's great. I think that should be normalized. Another thing that I've personally done, I think is best practice, is if you don't know somebody, just refer to them as a them, like they them, and then when you find out their pronouns or their name or both, then update that. Update your knowledge of their gender, their pronouns, their name, and use that going forward. Like I don't think there's anything wrong at all. I think it's actually great when people default to they them for people they don't personally know of like pronoun wise.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think we should move into our last segment before we get into Q&A, is how is EY supporting team members, and specifically around our HR enablement. And so here, I don't if you would like to walk through some of these attributes, and I can pepper in as well. But really around what type of benefits does EY provide, and how has it really impacted folks' ability to transition and feeling supported and being able to be authentic every day, that they can truly bring the best client. We're a client serving firm, and so our commodity, if you will, is our people. And so we got to make sure that our people are well supported, and if they're well supported and feel welcome that they're going to bring their best work forward, especially that we are dealing with a lot of quality specific items. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it to you for to walk through some of those talent attributes.
Hmm. So I know that one thing that EY does great is there are what I mentioned earlier, the defined process of transition at the workplace. If you were to reach out to HR and say that you're trans and you want to be in the transition process, HR has policies in place that will update your name in the system, that will update pronoun usage, because we have the option to provide that in our HR systems. And there will be support given to tell your team members, tell your supervisors, tell the people who report to you about that, so that they know that you're supported and that you are going to be using this. And I think that is pretty good in terms of internally. Communication wise, you get the you get a lot of flexibility to like tell people on your own terms when if you're trans or not. Or you don't have to do that, of course, but there's a lot of good that EY does. One thing that I think is amazing is that if your colleagues have any concerns, you EY has they're like pamphlets, kind of PDFs of typical terms and like understanding of trans people and how like you want to be referred to. They can provide these. HR can provide like a lot of information to colleagues so that colleagues can understand you better. And I think that's great. I wish more workplaces did that. In terms of
And Kira,
client
what
po-
you're
oh, go ahead.
mentioning is part of our transition to pathway toolkit, right?
That's correct.
There are elements
Yep.
within that. Okay.
Yep, definitely. Another thing that will happen is whenever you come out, all the clients that you're working on, the engagement managers that we have that are in contact with the clients can like tell them, hey, this you used to know this employee, you know this employee by this name, but they're actually going by this name now and these pronouns, and it's a very informal conversation where it's like, please refer to this employee with this name, these pronouns, and if you know, and that will be the best to do for them. So I think that's great to have. As far as education and awareness goes, I think the best thing that we do is the aforementioned Pathways to Transition Fund, which really raises what trans people are, like raises their knowledge of them and the support of them, and is oftentimes given to employees so that they can understand like how to treat us better, how to treat us the way we want to be treated. One of the reason why I joined EY from my previous job was because we have a fund set up for trans people. It's if you when you go to the doctor and you get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, you can send that diagnosis to EY, and then EY will let you have a $50,000 stipend to use on anything transition related medically that you want that is not covered by insurance. So like if I wanted to, I can get facial feminization surgery because that's not covered by insurance. I would be able to use the funds for that to pay for it. If I wanted to have, like, for instance, hair removal, like laser hair removal or electrolysis, I would be able to use the funds that you guys provided me for that. And it's really helpful because I think a lot of people underestimate just how expensive transition is because, like, if I want to get facial feminization surgery, it will be tens of thousands of dollars, and yeah, being trans is expensive. So that EY has this benefit of telling trans employees that they can have access to a lot of resources medically that are out of reach is amazing, and I am so happy that I have the support of EY in terms like financially and socially, structurally, and things like that. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I wanted to expand on some of those benefits. So it's not only the, the financial funding for some of those discretionary, surgeries or health needs, but we also then pepper in allowing folks to have that needed time off, whether it's for physical needs or medical needs, and then coupled with our unlimited PTO. So it's more of it starts at our policy level, for our pathway to transition. So it's in our physical policy that we will support this, not only from that financial perspective, but also from how does the organization support an individual, and then how is that individual supposed to be supported on a client engagement, whether it or in their daily work, right? Whether it's internal, external. Those policies are explicit, right? So part of our discrimination, part of our support and understanding. Obviously during this time, folks may not arguably be as productive just because they might be distracted by things that are going in their personal life, and those are contemplated part of our review cycles, and that way people don't get adverse either ratings and things like that, or promotion considerations. So it's very holistic, is the way I would describe it, in terms of it's not just the financial support, it's the whole well-rounded piece of starting from the policy level and then all the way through execution. I know that we may even have some room for improvement, and we tend to think of ourselves as the pioneer in some of these benefits. And I know EY is definitely open to hearing more about, what they can do to expand it. So, Kira, if there's nothing else that in terms of, providing some overview of benefits, love to transition into any Q&A. Yeah.
Nope, that's pretty much everything that I've mentioned. So I don't have anything else to add at the moment in terms of the talent resources. I will say that the only drawback I've had is that this is not exclusive to EY. This is like I think of legal requirements, but
Okay.
you can't unfortunately update your email address when you're with like a consulting firm, because there's some sort of requirement that you have to use your legal name, and that is the only drawback that I've had. Is if I don't have my name like legally updated, I can't get my email address updated, and that's unfortunate. I am thankful though that when I was with EY, when I started, I had already legally changed my name, so I could just come in as Dlouhy right off the bat.
That's an excellent point. Thanks for calling out that caveat.
Yep. And yeah, that's pretty much it for what I've gotten. I'd love to take some questions from people. Obviously, with the disclaimer that it's just my perspective and it's not indicative of everybody's.
Hi, Melissa.
All right, I'm back. There we go.
Hello.
Great. That is great information. So there are a couple of questions. One of them is not really a question. It's more of an observation, but kind of ends up that way. So it says, with the acceptance by the younger generation, I wonder if this is what motivates lawmakers to propose legislation to deny the existence and well-being of transgender people. What are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are that the people who are proposing these anti-trans bills just want to have an easy target that they can make people hate and drum up a lot of ire and anger so that these people go to the polls and vote for them. Like, trans kids have nothing. They really don't have like much legal acceptance in terms of what all they can do, and what rights they do have are being taken away just because it's completely like the people who are taking away trans kids' rights know exactly that there is no harm whatsoever coming from trans kids. It's just they don't want to see. They just really don't like trans people. They really hate trans people and don't want to see us happy. Some of the reasons is that if they, for instance, ban medical transition for like people under the age of 18, then we're going to go through like the puberty of what we were assigned at birth, and it'll make us a lot easier to be to be found out as trans, and it's just designed to make us suffer, honestly. Like, and like, how bad are these bills? In Utah, there was a bill proposed to ban trans people from playing sports in schools, like in high school, in junior high school, colleges, things like that. And the governor of Utah actually vetoed that because he put a statement saying that there were 75,000 kids in Utah that were in school, and only four, like not even double digits, like four of them were transgender. And he said that it was that these laws for being passed are pointless and just a sign of like suffering. Um, and I know like here in Texas, the The bills are very scary. The bills are very scary, and people just want to fight trans kids because we can't fight back. That's pretty much it. We can be scapegoated for a lot of society's problems, and there's not much we can do about it since like there's just not a lot of us.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, and that's what we need to bind together, right? And be there for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So, do you consider trans inclusive healthcare to be an essential element of a supportive workplace, or do you consider that less important than support for social transition, proper use of name, bathroom, dress code, etc.?
hmm I think it's both, honestly. I would put both on equal footing. I wouldn't say that social transition is more important or less important than medical transition because it's different for everybody. Like if you get social transition at like 13, where all your friends gonna like call you by your name, call you by your pronouns, things like that, that's absolutely fantastic. But for some people, if their families aren't supportive and won't get them on like puberty blockers, then eventually actually like hormones, they're going to grow up in the wrong puberty, and it will be an absolute nightmare for them like it was for me. And I think that you can't just say that social transition is enough because the medical component is absolutely critical. If I had transitioned like medically at like 12 or 13, instead of going through the male puberty I did and having to undo that for the rest of my life, it would have been so much easier on me. I would save a lot of money. I would save a lot of emotional and mental anguish. I would save a lot of just a lot. My life would have been a lot better. Like it absolutely would have been a lot better. But I'm just trying to recover from that. So yeah, social, medical transition, social transition, even footing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that as dual track, right? If you think about the social aspect, that's the community enablement, but then
Mhm.
the healthcare piece is really the personal enablement, and both of those go hand in hand. Kira, totally hear you on that.
Mhm.
Okay. Transgender Day of Visibility is Saturday, April 2nd. The Equality Coalition is holding a rally at 12 p.m. at the steps of the Texas Capitol. Would this be a good opportunity for allies in the LGBTQ 25 plus community to show their support?
Mhm. Absolutely. I actually knew about that was happening at the Capitol in Texas, so I was planning on going. What I think that we need now most of all is the visibility that allies can provide us, where they go and show up for us and let like the Texas government know that trans kids are supported, trans people are loved and accepted, and that it really helps us in a trans community because we know that there are people that are on our side that will fight for us, and that we're not alone in this. Because like last figures I read was that trans people only make up like 0.6% of the population. So knowing that we have cisgender allies, amazing. It gives us a lot of hope. It gives us a lot of hope for the future instead of the despair that is. very present in the community because of all these anti-trans bills.
Okay. Now, the other question is a question that I have. Looks like that's all the questions we have in the Q&A. Oh, take that back. There's a couple more that came on. Using EY's path to supporting trans employees, what steps do you think companies should look at doing as initial steps?
For initial steps, I would say reach out to organizations like the Human Rights Campaign because
Mm-hmm.
they have defined policies, best practices, guidelines for LGBT people in the workplace, including trans people. So if your company doesn't have one that is currently in place, see if you can get a copy of that and use it or use it as kind of a jumping off point for including a company specific policy, like culturally and things like that, so that trans people who are at your workplace can know that there are policies in place and be willing to come out, be willing to be themselves at work and know that they have the backs of like HR in the company. And then from there, like once those baselines are established and like trans people come out, just listen to them and have them like share resources and guidelines and perspectives and experiences to see what can be improved and what is going great.
Okay, great. Thank you. As a follow-up to the previous question, do you have any insight or suggestions on how to get an otherwise supportive workplace to begin offering trans-inclusive healthcare?
hmm I think that if I had to say what I would do to get them to offer trans inclusive healthcare, uh, a lot of that takes a lot of effort. It will admittedly take a lot of effort because reaching out to insurance companies, they typically have baselines that they provide for trans people. Pretty much the only thing they cover is if you're trans feminine, they cover bottom surgery, like SRS and things like that. If you're trans masculine, they cover top surgery, which is mastectomy. um, Getting in touch with the people who manage the health insurance benefits at work and seeing if they can talk to and talk internally and then talk with the insurance companies to get them to sponsor other transgender related surgeries would be the best way of going about it. If there's like not even any support for trans policies in the workplace at the moment, in terms of medical transition, I would say one thing is do research into how much transition costs because once you hit the hundreds of thousands of dollars that people sometimes can get to, it becomes a drain on the company, especially but more so on the employee because the employee just. I know in my case, I was pretty overwhelmed at my previous job because I didn't have that support and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to afford these surgeries. It's like, yeah, I make good money, but that's $100,000 that I would need for everything. So just having the chance to be like, this is how much it's going to cost, and if you provide this, I'm gonna have like so much extra drive and motivation to like be the best that I can at my job and know that I am supported and I can do a lot. So I would say talk with the trans people and then talk with the insurance providers to see if that's something that would possibly be able to happen. Is having medical transitions covered.
Yeah, so I'd like to expand a little bit tactically about that because I think the question is a little bit deeper in terms of like if the organization doesn't necessarily have that policy, what could they do? So EY approaches these types of things as business cases, right? So at the beginning of the day, EY is a business. So in order to enable the business and our commodity are our people, right? And I'm using the word commodity very loosely here. That in order for if we have trans individuals in our organization, that we've got to make sure that they have a welcoming workplace that is inclusive and that they feel welcomed. And in order for them to do that, the business case is we've got to have policies that support them, that there isn't a discrimination or recourse, right? And then once those policies are enabled, then through the business case and the policies, that's where the funding for benefits really happen, right? And so what Kira was expanding on is, okay, well, about the health side, or about the health insurance, about do we have specific HR resources? How do we have like internal support groups, right? So at EY, we've got, I wouldn't call it necessarily secretive, but we've got, a group of trans individuals. And by the way, we've got trans partners at the firm, right? And it's a trickle down all the way down. And those individuals, if individuals identify as trans, or they're looking to get support, potentially to transition, they can kind of get into those types of support groups. And so it's really starting from the policy level. But in order to get an organization to have a specific policy, building that business case, right? Like, what would be the return on investment if we provide these types of benefits, right? Kira will be more productive. Kira will be able to drive sales. Kira can, become a subject matter resource in technology consulting, right? And so that's the business case for providing these types of benefits, is the way from a business perspective we think about it. It's not only the right thing to do, but if you think about from the business impact, that's a lot of times that we bring these types of issues forward and get those benefits added.
Great. Thank you for adding that on, Vijay. So I was going to ask what your thoughts was on that. So good on that. I have one question that I've run across, and it's going back to the LGBT and LGBTQ and LGBTQIA. Something that I run across often. I work in my business. I work primarily with the older generation. So, we're talking 45 on up, right? And so when I'm talking to them, sometimes they ask me, if it's difficult for them to understand sometimes what the additional letters are in the LGBT, how can we get them to understand what the LGBTQIA is, especially when you're talking about parents that don't understand all the terms. They don't understand all the pronouns. They don't understand why we have all these letters. What would you say, to someone like that says, I am LGBT, but I don't understand all of these others. And how can I have my family or anyone else accept that as well?
Perfect organization for that would be PFLAG. Used to be known as Parents and Families of Lesbians and Gays. They've been around for a while, and they are an invaluable resource for any parents, families, like friends, allies, things like that, of queer people, of LGBT people. And I've spoken at a few of their events, and they have they have such good resources that explains everything about the LGBT, QIA plus community. That explains what all the letters mean, all the identities, things like that. And they provide resources to the parents and families and friends so that they can understand better and they can support us better. And they are so good. I really appreciate them and the work they do. For the LGBT community, they are invaluable.
Yes.
Yeah, and the way I think about it is it's a spectrum, right? So it's when I think about those letters, it's more of for us to be able to put that visibility out there, that there is a spectrum of individuality, and that there are groupings, right? We've got groupings of L, we've got groupings of G. But at the end of the day, I think when you think about all the letters, right, it is us trying to reinforce that there isn't a box for an individual, and that we are loosely and generally trying to apply, someone's identity, to what we think it is. But I think, I hope eventually generations down the line that we don't have to talk about this, right? That I don't have to identify as the G in that long acronym, right? That I can just be Vijay Patel that happens to like to do consulting and gardening or whatever else that I have passions for, right? I think us starting to expand the LGBT into those other letters, you know, I appreciate that because it's reinforcing that those boxes, that we don't necessarily have to have those boxes. So that's kind of anyway, my personal perspective.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. I think that don't believe I have any more questions, and I believe that kind of ends that there. So what I do want to end on is just kind of, you know, the company I work for, it's an insurance company. And one of the first things that I asked them a few years ago when we started hearing more about the transgender bills, and on our board, we have one of our board of directors is transgender as well. So I've actually learned a lot from her. And I asked her a lot of questions, and she didn't mind. She said, ask me whatever, because I want you, you know, to make sure that it's right, you know. So I definitely appreciate her being on the board. But one of the things that I went to when we had the director or the VP actually of the cultural markets here in town in our main offices in New York, I asked him, so what do we have in place if I have someone that's transgender and comes to me and says, I want to get insurance with you? I said, because I have a big market, LGBTQ market here, a community that I work with. And, you know, my board of directors started up what's called Trans Power here in San Antonio. And when I went to one of the events there, I mean, there must have been at least 100, you know, that's with family members as well. And so I was glad to hear that our company, which is a Fortune 100 company, does have something in place to where if I do have someone that wants to get life insurance through us, where a lot of other companies do not accept it, they accept it. And they told me what the process and procedures were. So I'm very happy to work for a company that actually has that in place where I can help all of my clients. Doesn't matter, you know, who they are. And it doesn't matter how they, you know, what it is that's on their driver's license, right? I mean, this is who I am. This is how I present myself. And they said, yes, that's how we take them. So just kind of let you know that, you know, it works in progress, you know, and our company does accept that. So I'm very happy to see that. So thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Kara, for presenting today and giving us lots of insightful information. Before I wrap up the day, I do want to say thank you to all of our amazing speakers. With that said, the Networking Cafe will be open until 4 p.m. today, so stick around and make some great connections across the state. Thank you to all of our panelists and guest speakers. Rhodes Perry, amazing keynote talk. I really, there's a lot of information that I got out of that. Most importantly, this would not be possible without your attendance to this first annual Workplace Alliance Summit. We look forward to having more. To all my colleagues from the other chambers, thank you so much as well. And thank you, every individual, you know, for joining us today. Now I'm going to take this back to Tammy for final remarks.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. And I want to echo what Melissa said. Thank you to our amazing panelists and for our panelists, our speakers. Today has just been remarkable. And of course, a groundbreaking day as we have launched the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance program officially to support our chamber corporate partners across the state of Texas. Just a couple of final notes. Our next LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance event is going to be on April the 13th. That is going to be actually in collaboration with our Plexus chamber, one of our other LGBTQ chambers. And that is going to be focused on HRC CEI, the Corporate Equality Index, getting to 100. You do not want to miss that event. And I also just wanted to quickly note the NGLCC, the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, is having their Trans Day of Visibility on March 31st. You can find that information on our calendar. So we'll be participating in that if as another Transgender Day of Visibility event. But speaking of more events coming up with LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance, make sure you're checking out with your regional chamber, your market chamber. We'll be doing more statewide events, but with your regional chamber, check with them about upcoming events with Austin, San Antonio, North Texas, and of course, we'll be rolling out some in Houston. If your company is not a corporate partner, it is truly a good time to be part of what is happening with the Texas LGBTQ chambers and the state of Texas. I really think we're doing some amazing work on behalf of the community, working to support our corporate partners, small businesses, and the community as a whole. So reach out to us. Let us know how we can support you, how we can collaborate and partner. We'd love to have you as part of the chamber. And then just a quick note about the book and the bonuses. I wanted to throw this out as a reminder. You're going to get the book. It's coming your way. It'll come out, be sent right after the session with Rhodes. So, and keep an eye out. We're going to be doing a follow-up email from this session that will include the link to all the bonuses that we talked to Rhodes about. And I promise you, again, it's a comprehensive list, some good stuff. And you can feel free to share that internally. And if you do want to do a bulk book purchase for your ERG or your company, please reach out to your market chamber and we will get you connected to Rhodes and AM to make that happen. So thank you again for helping us make history today. We really, really appreciate it. Stick around. As Melissa said, the Chamber Networking Cafe is open. Connect with one another. And thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next LGBTQ+ Workplace Alliance event.